Look at me and tell me what you see. I look at you and tell you what I feel. Look at me and tell me what you see. I look at you and tell you what I feel.
Welcome back. Today's Patreon requested review is Dark City, the second Kiefer Sutherland film we've looked at, and for another connection, this film was directed by Alex Proyas, director of The Crow, with the visual similarities apparent almost immediately. Also, I'll be looking at the director's cut because it's the vastly superior version. For example, in the original version, the film starts with narration from Kiefer Sutherland's character, Dr. Schreiber, who gave away pretty much all the mystery to the film. So you can understand why they got rid of it. Leaving that aside though, it's a nicely ambiguous opening here as the Doctor looks at his watch and seems pleased that it stopped exactly at midnight. We then get the opening titles, which makes me think this is an Uzumaki film with all the spirals. And moving across the titular city, you can see the very similar cityscape to The Crow. And it's oddly similar to the cityscape of The Matrix, mainly because Dark City's production sold their sets to the production of The Matrix, making this film essentially 3 films in one. We then meet our main character, John Murdoch, waking up in a bathtub in a dingy-looking bathroom, totaling it to 4 films in one, as we can include Saw to the mix now. He also doesn't know his name yet, because
I have amnesia!
Yes, good old amnesia. However, for Dark City, they use the amnesia trope very well, and it's not just part of the plot, it's actually quite integral to the story and Murdoch's character. Speaking of which, he wakes up, naturally confused, with a drop of blood on his forehead, to suggest more later. Outside the bathroom, Murdoch first accidentally breaks a goldfish bowl, taking care to replace the fish in his disgusting used bathwater, so I'm sure it's grateful for that. He tries to recall the past by looking through a suitcase, finding a postcard for Shell Beach. It does briefly jog some memories, if only briefly. He then receives a phone call from Dr. Schreiber, who panickingly informs him his memory was lost in an experiment, and there are people coming to get him. And I like that. It's literally all we have to go on, and even then, we don't know if the Doctor was lying or not. Murdoch starts the film as a completely blank slate. And once we've established more of what's going on, I'll explore why that works so well. But not before the film gets quite darker. Because, mid-phone call, Murdoch sees the dead body of a woman on the floor, with spirals carved into her skin, which naturally causes him to freak out and run off. The hotel room number is one of those clever little details that reveal so much, because Murdoch later discovers his name is John. And if you look up the Bible verse, John 6:14, you will find, "When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, 'This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world.'" There's just so much context there from a few frames of a film. As Murdoch descends the stairs, the people coming to find him arrive. Creepy, pale, bald men in long coats and big hats, who are known as the Strangers. Also, I'm not sure if it was intentional, but they are very similar looking to the traditional urban legend version of the Men in Black. Down in reception, it should be noted the hotel clock has also stopped at 12 and everyone is unconscious. However, once the clock strikes the time, everybody wakes up like it never happened. And the receptionist gives Murdoch some information, like his partial name, J. Murdoch, and that his wallet has been left at a nearby automat. It's all very mysterious, which is increased by the lack of the Dear Doctor's spoilerific narration, because we get to feel like Murdoch does, waking up in an unknown location, no idea what's going on or who everyone is. It's a great opening, as it's rare to find a film where the lack of narrative information actually helps immerse you into the story. At a nearby river, Murdoch throws away his suitcase. Not sure that's the best idea considering it's his only link to his memories. But that's the least of his problems, since back at the hotel, the receptionist immediately runs into the Strangers in Murdoch's room, wanting to locate him as they inspect a strange broken syringe on the floor. They find out Murdoch's just left, and they somehow make the receptionist fall asleep on command. Also, if you don't know, which you really should, One of the strangers, by the name of Mr. Hand, is played by and was specifically written for the great Richard O'Brien, writer and lyricist of the Rocky Horror Show and a personal childhood icon of mine. And he plays the creepy, all-knowing, powerful Mr. Hand quite expertly, with this high-pitched breathiness to his voice that just adds to the creepiness. He's definitely up there in my list of top villains. We then move to what looks like a 1950s speakeasy, as our other main character, Emma, Murdoch's wife, is singing. And once she's finished, she's told that Dr. Schreiber has been asking for her, shifting to his office where they talk around Schreiber's spiral maze for lab rats, which is not exactly the subtlest hint the movie could throw at us. Schreiber claims to be Murdoch's psychiatrist who's been helping for some time without Emma's knowledge, since she cheated on her husband. He encourages her to see him as an ally and wants her help to locate Murdoch. I do like how that, even though Schreiber has really done nothing wrong, it's the little things he does, the way he acts and speaks, that still gives an uneasy edge to him, which is all down to Sutherland's acting. Also, the film has kind of calmed down now with its bombardment of information, so I'll mention something that might have escaped your notice. The film has an average cut length of about 2 seconds, meaning there are no long shots, which gives the film this kind of dreamlike quality. But once you know the cut length, it becomes very noticeable and very distracting. I just can't help feeling that it could have been done a little less often and still maintain that dreamlike feeling. Back with Murdoch, having only a last name and an initial can be quite frustrating, so he takes some time to try and recall his first name, in a very interesting and odd way, as he goes through different names to see which one sounds right coming out of his mouth.
My name's Jason Murdoch. John Murdoch. Jake Murdoch. How's it going? Hi, Jack Murdoch. Hi.
Which didn't make him look mental at all, I'm sure. We're then introduced to a third main character, a police inspector with the ridiculous name of Bumstead. I would like to think his name has some kind of insight into his character, however, Bumstead means place where the reeds grow. So you're welcome to figure out some kind of meaning, but for me, it's just a slightly silly sounding name. Something that does have significance to the film is he's playing a song on the accordion, Mala Blakitna Chutetska, Little Blue Handkerchief, which is about a lonely man who wanders aimlessly thinking about a lost love, very appropriate for the film. And Bumstead's emotional connection to the song and instrument is shown when he wipes away his tears. He's called about the murder, and at the hotel an officer notes a statement from the receptionist. Well, it's actually a different guy, but he recalls the exact same conversation the previous guy had with Murdoch. More nods to the strange things going on. And at the same time, Murdoch is finding his fingerprints have the same spiral pattern we've been seeing everywhere. Speaking of which, if you're hoping for a definite explanation to why all the spirals, it's never truly explained or their purpose shown. However, I will elaborate on my theories later. Murdoch goes to the automat to retrieve his wallet. Fortunately, the manager recognises him, but like a complete arsehole, he puts Murdoch's wallet in one of the automat compartments. Did the guy think Murdoch would pay him back with the money in the wallet he doesn't have? Luckily, Murdoch has a little trick up his sleeve. I like to think that was Murdoch's "that's for being a dickhead" power. On his way out, Murdoch is stopped by 2 cops, without reason, who really don't seem to mind Murdoch being picked up by a prostitute, as they let him leave with her. Back at the hotel, Bumstead inspects the room and the body, this being the 6th murder in a recent serial killing case, which means Murdoch's gotten deeper in the shit now. However, Bumstead questions why Murdoch would kill the woman but save a goldfish. And then the previous inspector on the case, Walensky, shows up, ranting and raving about what sounds like nonsense, but in this film, it's definitely not. At the station, Bumstead finds Walensky's office covered in papers and drawings, mostly of spirals. And getting the fingerprints from the crime scene, the spiral motif continues, confusing everyone. And with the spiral stuff, they won't ever really appear again. It's just going to be more cryptic spirals. Nothing else needs to be added to it. But it's the prevalence of them in the first 15 minutes of the film that might make you think they're far more important than they actually are. Bumstead has more than enough to deal with, but Emma shows up at the police station to give him a lead on the J. Murdoch he's currently after. Her husband has been missing and repeats what the doctor told her. And despite being married for years to Murdoch, Bumstead points something out.
How long have you been married?
Nearly 4 years. Because you seem uncomfortable with your ring, as if you were unaccustomed to wearing it.
This particular line says volumes about the strangers to me, because I'm sure it's no secret that the strangers are doing something to people, so they put the ring on Emma's finger, showing that fundamentally they have no idea how people work, since you can't just force them to wear a ring without it seeming unnatural. It's a line that works better on a second viewing, in retrospect, but it really does emphasise the big flaw with the strangers. Once Bumstead tells Emma about the murders Murdoch is suspected of, she leaves immediately, not believing him. We then move to the prostitute's apartment with Murdoch, where the woman strips, giving the audience a full frontal. After spotting the woman's young daughter, though, he exits pretty quickly. And that was Melissa George's first ever movie role. What a great start! Murdoch discovers another link to his past, a billboard advertising Shell Beach, that he nonsensically climbs up to examine better, which I don't think it would reveal any more than the postcard he has. Once up there, Murdoch finds his pockets full of newspaper clippings of the murders, adding credence to the possibility of his guilt. The strangers then appear, finally tracking Murdoch down. Mr. Hand tries his party trick of sending Murdoch to sleep, but to his surprise, it has no effect. Well, it's not like he's got much left after that fails. Oh, well, that's just cheating. Fortunately for Murdoch, he's not the smartest and immediately falls through the weak floorboards, leaving just 3 for Murdoch to face. He uses his power again to collapse more of the floor as another stranger falls, getting a rope caught round his neck, and another one of them refers to this as tuning. Also, there's this. See, how do you make a creepy pale bald man chasing you creepier? Make one of them a freaky looking child. Thanks for that, Mr. Sleep. Mr. Hand floats back up from whence he came, causing Murdoch to fall into the hole too. Pulling on some ropes, he inadvertently breaks the swinging arm mechanism, which drops, killing another stranger, Mr. Quick, which causes Mr. Hand to feel the pain through their shared hive mind. Then the creature inhabiting Mr. Quick's body is shown as it drops from his skull, dying. I do like how it's made clear from the beginning, with the creature's appearance and the odd clicking sound they make, that the strangers are most definitely not human or even humanoid. There's no ambiguity there. The strangers have met up to discuss the botched capture, which shouldn't be necessary as it's established that they have a hive mind, so they should already know what happened. Hence, we wouldn't receive the same information twice. Bumstead has driven Emma home, both unsure if Murdoch is really the killer. Inside, Emma is relieved to find Murdoch home, yet he's aloof as he doesn't recognise her. He tells his wife about the prostitute as he wanted to test his killing urges, but is adamant he's not a murderer. Emma believes him, but he runs when he notices Bumstead's car is still outside. Murdoch tries explaining to Bumstead at gunpoint, but admits the situation's ridiculous, and escapes with Emma's help. Murdoch uses his power to generate a door and exit, leaving Bumstead with just a wall. However, he does find Schreiber's business card. Murdoch catches a taxi, and noticing a Shell Beach snow globe, he asks the driver if he knows the way there. The driver says he does, but when he tries, the knowledge leaves his mind. So Murdoch gets out to speak with Schreiber. However, Bumstead is already there asking questions, with Schreiber this time changing his story, believing Murdoch is a killer, despite Bumstead's doubts. Later, Schreiber is at a local baths when Mr. Hand shows up for a chat, and we learn another fact about the strangers.
Most unfortunate it is that we were forced to seek you out here. You know how uncomfortable we find all this moisture.
Which raises significant questions on why the bathhouse even exists at all. But I'll examine the little illogical things like that once all the mystery has been revealed. Mr. Hand tells Schreiber about the broken syringe found at the hotel, and Schreiber admits that Murdoch backed the syringe away, so wasn't imprinted with new memories. Mr. Hand reveals Murdoch can also tune, which surprises Schreiber since it should be impossible. New orders are given to Schreiber to recreate those memories, implying that Mr. Hand has a new plan for them. While Murdoch watches from the shadows, Mr. Hand leaves, but not before he messes with Schreiber a bit, as he somehow makes the pool's ladder disappear and reappear elsewhere, implying more of the stranger's abilities. Meanwhile, Bumstead visits his colleague Walensky, whose wife is very worried about him as in his room he scrolls nonsense and draws plenty of spirals on the wall. Walensky reveals he's been spending a lot of time in the subway, going round and around the route, not getting anywhere. And that's the most we'll ever get as an explanation for the spirals, that the city goes round and round, with nothing else to suggest it has any kind of higher meaning. Which is weird, because we're shown later that it's the strangers who have been carving this spiral pattern into the women's bodies. It feels like the film was grasping for some kind of identifying mark, but it ultimately falls flat because it ultimately doesn't really make much sense. Walensky continues to sound crazy, telling Bumstead that past memories are difficult to recall. And what he says does make sense, but to Bumstead, he just comes off as crazy. Murdoch continues to shadow Schreiber as he sees a door materialize for him to use and then disappear. And in the stranger's lair, we see a big conveyor belt of people's personal items and effects that these strangers are altering by hand. So if the strangers can manipulate the environment, and we'll see later they can just make objects appear, why don't they just make all the objects that way? And if they can't make the objects that way, they can manipulate memories, so they can just dictate what someone does and does not have. And speaking of memories, Schreiber is in his lab concocting liquid memories to be used on people. And it's never really explained how the memories are in liquid form. I'm just going to put it down to the strangers nicking that thing from Dumbledore's office. Schreiber's work is momentarily cut short as the stranger's leader, Mr.Book, appears to hold him over a pit, while asking him why and how Murdoch can tune. Schreiber's explanation is he somehow has evolved the ability, adapting to survive the environment the strangers have created. And then there's this mighty clunker of dialogue.
Weren't you looking for the human soul? That's the purpose of your little zoo, isn't it? That's why you keep changing people and things around every night.
Oh, that was a pretty bad piece of exposition right there. That was almost as bad as a character saying, as you know, ... The line's there just to give information to the audience in a very quick and easy way. But it could have been done so much better. After their little chat, Mr. Book and the strangers gather for their nightly tuning, shutting down the city. Literally.
Shut it down!
See? As we watch the city hustling and bustling, and this absolutely horribly dubbed couple.
I can't sleep, and they call my job unskilled.
You think you've got it tough? You try looking after these kids for a change.
Why are they so horribly dubbed? And why is their dialogue incredibly stilted? However, luckily these strangers arrive to fix the problem, as the entire population of the city falls unconscious. Well, except for Murdoch, that is, who's unsettled by the whole thing, trying to get an answer from anyone. And while he does that, the strangers, using their tuning ability, change the city, shifting buildings around as Murdoch watches, and sees the strangers moving people. With Schreiber administering memory injections. We also witness the couple's surroundings transform to something far more elegant. As you can see, tiny objects appear throughout the room and on the table. So the strangers clearly can and do materialize whatever they wish for any given situation. Which brings me back to my points. Why would they need to handcraft anything in such a primitive manner? Or, why would they create something they can't stand like the bathhouse? Since the reason why Shell Beach doesn't exist is that they don't like moisture. It's just a lot of little things that are very inconsistent. Once Schreiber has finished, Murdoch appears to ask him some questions. Schreiber insists he's there to help, but Murdoch isn't satisfied and is angry enough to fire him across the street with his ability. But Schreiber wants to develop Murdoch's powers to overthrow the strangers. But considering he's been flip-flopping on his story about Murdoch, it's unclear what his true motives really are. Once everything returns to normal, the strangers discuss their experiment, with Mr. Book told that a location was not created because they sensed Murdoch's influence on the machine, as the strangers get increasingly worried about Murdoch's powers. Mr. Hand proposes a rather drastic idea, as he'll inject the memories that Murdoch was supposed to receive and gain the information required to locate him. One of the other strangers does query how these memories will help them find Murdoch if he didn't receive them. But to me, this is just another example of the stranger's inability to comprehend memory, and how memory breeds an emotional connection, which Murdoch wouldn't have. But I think everyone is forgetting the fact that they tried to give Murdoch the memories of a serial killer. So Schreiber performs the imprint as Mr. Hand gets a rush of memories, the good and the bad, seeing himself as the murderer Murdoch was supposed to be, and I think we can all see this going wrong. Murdoch continues to find clues, reading a postcard from his uncle, heading there next, and his understanding of the city increases when he speaks with a newsagent, who is the original hotel receptionist he spoke to. But unlike the previous times, Murdoch seems to be more accepting of the strangeness, showing his knowledge of what's occurring is increasing. And Mr. Hand is quick to indulge his new urges, as he and two others visit the prostitute Murdoch spoke to earlier. But she doesn't know anything useful, with one of the other strangers, Mr. Wall, doubting Mr. Hand's plan has any validity, suggesting they visit where Murdoch worked. And this is where Mr. Hand's character becomes something different, as when the suggestion to visit Murdoch's work comes up, Mr. Hand says,
"I do not care about our job."
I think Mr. Hand is overestimating his connection to Murdoch, which makes sense since all he's ever known is a hive mind. He thinks he's on the same wavelength as Murdoch, when really, that couldn't be further from the truth. Murdoch is investigating the subway, but not moving anywhere fast. He even meets Walensky, who's been doing the same thing. Walensky informs him that these strangers switch people's memories around, and similarly, like him and Murdoch, every so often somebody wakes up when they're not supposed to. However, on top of the words of wisdom, he also says he knows a way out.
I figured a way out!
Yeah, it's a neat trick, but he can only do it once. Murdoch has gone to speak with his uncle, Carl, being led by his postcard. And while he does that, Emma has gone to the prostitute, of course finding her very dead, with Bumstead having followed her there. See, she had spirals cut into her body. Why would the strangers allow Mr. Hand to do that? You could argue to make it look like the other murders and to pin it on Murdoch, but the spirals being there in the first place is completely counterproductive to their plan and keeping it a secret. While Bumstead deals with the crime scene, Murdoch is going through old pictures with Carl about Shell Beach, finding out that his parents died in a fire. However, in one of the pictures, he notices his younger self has a scar on his arm, but he doesn't have that now at all, tipping Murdoch off to the forgery. A lot of the movie is designed to feel like a dream, the fact that it takes place at an ambiguous time of day and period in history, for example. And the quick cuts emphasise this timeless quality, and for Murdoch, it does start to slowly suck him into this dream gently. But then, he wakes up and into reality. It's a nice continuous dedication to this theme. And to further emphasise the dreamlike quality of the film, Murdoch asks about a clock, whether it's AM or PM, not really getting an answer, and he wonders aloud what happened to the day. And that is one of my favourite aspects of the film. It actually uses the fact that it's a film to its advantage, achieving something that you wouldn't really get in a book, for example. Because we, the audience, haven't seen daylight, but it's just accepted as normal. Maybe the film just skipped over those parts. But for Murdoch, he's been awake this entire time, so it's pretty much been one continuous time frame, making it feel like we were tricked by the strangers into accepting this permanent darkness the exact same way everyone in the city has as well. It's a very clever use of the medium. Murdoch also finds his childhood scrapbook, but discovers it's blank, so that, on top of the non-existent scar, makes me wonder if the strangers were having some kind of off day with their meticulous attention to detail. He wants to ask Carl about the book, but has to leave when he hears him call Emma. And that's when the strangers shut the city down again, leaving Murdoch alone to fend them off. And the dream becomes more nightmare-like as the stairs grow in front of him, and he witnesses the city transform again from the rooftop. Mr. Hand corners Murdoch, but when he's disarmed and held at knife point, more information is provided on what the strangers are and their aims. The city is their experiment to try and find what makes people human. Also, I find it interesting that Mr. Hand says that the strangers use the bodies of the dead as vessels. So, in theory, every stranger we see was an original member of the city who died and was then taken over by one of those creatures we've seen. Which, firstly, means that the population of the city was vastly larger originally, but also it just makes the strangers a lot creepier. Especially because of Mr. Sleep, for example, who's a child. The buildings continue to change, separating Murdoch and Mr. Hand, and the nightmare goes on for Murdoch as he opens a door to nothing falling through. And then the ever-creepy Mr. Sleep starts to bite his fingers. Murdoch jumps to another moving structure and escapes, just as the city resumes normal functions. He's cornered by Mr. Hand and the other two strangers, but fortunately, Bumstead is able to pick him up and get out of there. Murdoch is immediately interrogated by Bumstead, showing the scrapbook, which is now oddly full of pictures. However, he turns the tables, asking Bumstead if he knows the way to Shell Beach, who can't recall either. Bumstead also can't remember when he last did something during the day, choosing denial. So Murdoch gets drastic, using his ability to levitate the book, which doesn't completely blow Bumstead's mind like it should. Murdoch is allowed to speak with Emma, who apologizes for her infidelity, but Murdoch tells her none of it happened, and that they possibly never knew each other. However, this brings me back to Murdoch being a blank slate, because it might sound mushy, but when he says he loves her, breaking the glass to do it as well, it's clear that those feelings are all of his own, making him the most genuine character in the entire film, and justifying why he is the main character. After this, the strangers are less subtle, assaulting the police station, knocking everyone out, and getting the chief to lead them to Murdoch's cell. But Bumstead was there first, and we see more of Mr. Hand's new personality. The strangers are creepy, yes, but none of them have really shown complete sadism quite like Mr. Hand does, with his little smile there. Murdoch has gone to the baths again looking for more answers from Schreiber, who remains untrustworthy, pointing a gun and ordering Murdoch to inject himself with the memory solution. Of course, Bumstead is there as backup, so Murdoch keeps the syringe and the group finally go to Shell Beach. And while they do that, the strangers are at Emma and Murdoch's place to give her a new identity. Murdoch and Bumstead have resorted to taking a boat downstream to get to the beach, and Schreiber explains everything about the strangers. Everything that we've had little bits and pieces of, but this fills in all the blanks, and the goals of the Strangers' experiment. Schreiber explains that the Strangers' race is dying out, and the city and all the people in it are part of an experiment, a search for the human soul. His words, not mine. It's never really explained how this would save their race, or what they're even dying from. It's all very vague, which for a mystery film would be a big problem. But when it comes to the Strangers, I like the fact that their origins and motivations are kept somewhat ambiguous. The three men reach their destination, finding Shell Beach, but it's still just a billboard. Schreiber tells them there's nothing beyond the city, but understandably out of frustration, Murdoch and Bumstead bash down the wall, seeing nothing but an empty void into space, revealing the city is a spacecraft. And despite being quite off the grid in this city, the strangers show up pretty damn quickly, leading to a shootout, as one of them tackles Bumstead and he and the stranger fall through into space. Weird bit of trivia here for you, but that scene of the two men falling through a force field was actually added to appease the test audiences, who were concerned about why the entire city wasn't sucked out into space. I love the fact that in a film about memory-swapping alien parasites in dead bodies and shifting cityscapes, that's what they had issue with. But anyway, outside of the force field, we finally see the entire city, which isn't a spiral, so missed opportunity there, I think. It's also pretty much the last of Bumstead, as he's not even mentioned again, so it's kind of a weak send-off for him. Back with Murdoch, he's forced to surrender by Mr. Hand holding Emma at knife point, and this time he's able to cause Murdoch to fall asleep, leading me to believe that it was Murdoch's force of will keeping the ability from working on him. Murdoch has been taken into the lair of the strangers, and they confirm his evolved status, with them all wanting one thing: kill him. Mr. Sleep there continuing to be adorably creepy in every way. Mr.Book tells them that Murdoch's the one they need, and in a rather drastic putting their eggs in one basket kind of move, Mr.Book shuts the city down forever, as they are to combine their minds with Murdoch, again with no explanation on how this will help them. Schreiber administers the syringe, however, he uses the needle from Murdoch's coat, as we see him relive his life, with Schreiber inserted into the memories in a very clever way to coach Murdoch on using his skills, as we see him grow in ability. And just as the strangers realise what's happened, Murdoch wakes up in full power mode. So Murdoch proceeds to fight with Mr. Book, having a duel of sorts with their mind powers, as the place crumbles around them, and the machine bursts through the ground, with both men dueling in the skies, which has parallels to the Matrix. Murdoch defeats Mr. Book, and presumably the rest of the strangers, by impaling him. Schreiber reveals that Emma has been reprinted, and the memories have been destroyed, so the film ends with Murdoch letting the sun shine on the city, and he's finally able to create Shell Beach, starting the city once again. There's one last moment from Mr. Hand clearly dying, and he's forced to back away for good once the sunlight hits him. And Murdoch meets Emma, now Anna, on the pier, confident that they can start again. And Emma standing on the end of the pier is very similar to the imagery of Requiem for a Dream. So that bodes well for Jennifer Connelly here. That was Dark City. A lot of Dark City could be confused for being a tired concept stolen from more successful movies, like The Matrix for example. But in reality, Dark City was the originator here, and it's only because of its lack of notice the time it came out is why it doesn't get the recognition it honestly deserves. With an intriguing concept and design, with a mystery that's compelling even when it expands to something far more otherworldly. And the acting is very noteworthy, with the standout for me, of course, being Richard O'Brien, as one of my favourite villains, Mr. Hand. He is ultimately what makes this film. If they had got anyone else, I don't think it would have worked as well. And once again, this video has been made possible by the donations on Patreon, so if you would like to donate, make a request, and keep the show going, the link is in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.